What is up, Pitt fans? Welcome to another edition of the PG Pitt Show, brought to you by FanDuel. I'm Stephen Thompson. That's Abby Schnable. We cover Pitt athletics for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I am actively covering Pitt athletics for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm here at the Pete ahead of Pitt basketball's exhibition against Pitt Johnstown. One more game before it gets real, the season opener a week from today against Youngstown State at the Pete. But Abby, this is a football show. We are football-centric today. Coming off a bit, and why not? 5 wins in a row. Pitt coming off a really dominant win against NC State. So we are all about the gridiron this week, or this Monday, I guess.
Yeah, how about those two losses? We would have never thought that at this point in the season we'd be thinking, oh man, they have a chance to make the freaking ACC championship game. A lot of things have to happen for that to happen, but it's way more possible than we ever kind of thought it would be, especially after those two losses. So yeah, it's been fun. Lots of the game this past weekend, lots to write about. Had to trim my gamer a little bit because it was just touchdown after touchdown, it felt. So should be another good week.
You're right. Lots has to happen for them to make an ACC championship game, but significantly less has to happen now compared to a week ago. SMU going down, Miami going down 2 weeks prior. A lot of the barriers to that ultimate goal are being torn down. Meanwhile, Pitt is kind of rolling along. According to our friends at FanDuel, they are 14-point favorites against Stanford this weekend, so another opportunity to keep that momentum going. But we're going to roll it back to that NC State game, give some final thoughts, kind of close the book there. First thing that we got to talk about, Abby, is the use of the running backs. And this is something we've touched on a bunch over these last few weeks and throughout this season. But I think where we should start, and there are two things that we should touch on within the running back room. But the first is Desmond Reid's usage, right? So we saw him playing well into the third quarter when, and even close to the end of the third quarter. When that win over NC State was really in hand, Pitt had, a 4-score advantage, I guess. They were up by 25 points. And then you have two running backs in Juelz, Goff, and Jakiri and Turner that you believe in and that you think are pretty good and that I think are pretty good and I think you think are pretty good too. But Pat Narduzzi leaves Desmond Reid in there. He's continuing to get carries, and eventually he goes down with another injury, right? And we've seen Des, he's kind of made out of rubber to a certain extent. Like, he'll cramp up and then come right back into the game. He'll take a really hard hit and bounce right up, but this is one that he did not return from. In fact, we saw him walking around on the sidelines in a walking boot in the fourth quarter. Makes you a little bit concerned about his long-term health, and his health is always going to be in question. So, Abby, what did you hear from Pat Narduzzi today about why Desmond Reid was still in there and why they continued to run him even when that game was a little out of hand?
Yeah, I was going back and forth of whether I was going to ask him because I kind of expected that this was going to be his answer, but he essentially said, one, he didn't feel comfortable, like they still hadn't won the game, so he wanted to keep his best guys, which when you're up that much, and Jakiri and Turner has been playing as well as he has, give your senior running back a break would make sense. And then he followed it up with, Des wants to be on the field. Like, he doesn't want to be standing on the sidelines. And I get that. I totally understand that. That's like what all these players want to do. But at some point, Kade Bell, Pat Narduzzi, or even Des himself need to realize that it doesn't make sense for him to be in that game, especially when they do have such good chances at this point to make an ACC championship game. He said you have to balance between, trying to protect him and playing him because he is your best option. And I think they went over the line on that. I thought they have been really good at balancing him, and then this time it just didn't make sense at all. Even if he wants to play, you're the coach, you need him moving down the line. And like we said, Jakiri and Turner and has been really solid these past couple of weeks, and Juelz Goff started off the season really solid, just hasn't been getting as many snaps because of everyone else playing. And so it was confusing. I didn't love the answer because, I feel like there has to be a semblance of even he realizes that it was probably a mistake, but, he stood 10 toes down. Didn't feel comfortable with the win, and Des wanted to be out there.
Yeah, and I can definitely buy the argument about not feeling like you had won the game yet, right? Like, it's 25 points. That's nominally 3 scores, essentially, going into the fourth quarter. We've seen Pitt blow big leads before. So I understand him, I guess, from that perspective, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, Pat Narduzzi, you're the adult in the room here. And I know Des is not a little kid, but like you and Kade Bell and Lindsey Lamar, like you guys are the adults in the room. And to say that, a couple days after, there was another big injury in that game. Kenny Johnson did not feel great at the end of that game, and he didn't play in the entire second half, right? Like, and Narduzzi told us after the game that Kenny was pushing to go back in. He felt good enough to play, but Pat is telling us it's up to the trainers, it's up to the medical staff, and we just didn't feel comfortable. We didn't need him. They didn't need Kenny Johnson in that game, but they needed Desmond Reid in the fourth quarter. That just doesn't add up, Mm-hmm. That just doesn't really make any sense to me at all. And for kind of similar reasons too, right? Like, Ja'Kyrie Turner and Juelz Goff are perfectly capable. And the way Pitt was throwing the ball, it wasn't like Desmond Reid was necessarily making a huge impact on that game himself. He had a rushing touchdown. Of course, I don't want to minimize that, but like this wasn't a Florida State scenario where you had to really, really squint to see them winning the game without him. Like they had this game in hand, and even if the game wasn't in hand, I'm pretty sure, even if it was only a 14-point game, I don't think Des was doing the type of things in those games where you said, okay, we cannot win this game without him. So I'm with you. It doesn't really make a ton of sense, and I think the most you can hope for at this point is that Pitt doesn't pay for it further down the line because, look, like Stanford, that's probably a team that you can beat without Desmond Reid or even him on a snap count. Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, Miami, I don't think are in the same category. So hopefully this isn't a long-term thing and that Pitt can get him back after the bye week. But flipping to the other side of this conversation, we talked a little bit about it already, but like Ja'Kyrie Turner really, really showing up. Another rushing touchdown on Saturday. He leads the team in rushing and receiving touchdowns. He has 6 touchdowns from scrimmage, I guess you would say, which leads the team. And he has been kind of the hot hand recently. But Juelz Goff kind of started the year in front of him, and it seems like things have flipped a little bit. Did Coach Dews have any insight into what happened there in the kind of order on the depth chart at backup running back?
Yeah, he essentially was like, I mean, you see what Ja'Kyrie and Boosie Turner is doing. Like, why wouldn't you keep him out? And I totally understand from that perspective. Ja'Kyrie has been playing really well. We've seen a lot of explosive plays from him. We've seen a lot of Desmond Reid-esque plays from him. And that's huge, especially if Des is on a snap count or out of the game. I do have to wonder, going back, they did use Juelz Goff so heavily, but Ja'Kyrie Turner was injured for a good chunk of the training camp. So I guess it makes sense in that aspect of why it wasn't even then. And then, I mean, the coach says it, and we'll talk about this on the defensive end too, is you want your best players on the field. And if they think right now Ja'Kyrie Turner is the best other than Des, then yeah, you go with that. But at the same time, when you have 3 capable running backs, like the 3 of them, and all 3 of them add something a little bit different. I mean, Juelz Goff is so consistent in what he does. Maybe not as explosive. We've seen some glimpses of it, but I mean, sometimes I feel like consistency, and especially in a game like the NC State game, when you're in the third quarter up 23 points or 24 points, and Ja'Kyrie's played this whole time. Desmond Reid has played this whole time. Why not throw Juelz Goff in? Because at that point, like, just get the kid some reps. Like, unless something's going on that we don't know about, it just doesn't make sense to me that he's not getting out there. Like, I mean, I think someone said, I heard 8 snaps the other day, and that's just, for a guy who really started out the season high, it just is a little confusing, even though Ja'Kyrie Turner is in my mind easily the second best option.
Yeah, so my thing is I don't know if you necessarily need like 3 running backs every game. Like, I do think that Juelz Goff probably should be playing more than 8 snaps. Like that's pretty low, especially for a game where you're pretty handily beating your opponent like Pitt was last week. But I think what we're seeing really is kind of the knowledge difference being shrunk a little bit, right? So, Ja'Kyrie Turner, true freshman, I believe he did enroll early, but like you said, had been in and out with some injuries. And meanwhile, you had Juelz Goff, who was really a mainstay for Pitt since, well, let's call it November, when Desmond Reid was in and out, and then through spring ball when Reid was, I mean, I would say artificially limited. It didn't seem like he was necessarily dealing with anything other than the coach wanting to limit his reps, and it was the same thing in training camp. So it really benefited Juelz Goff to kind of he's a year older than Turner, and so he got some reps and got some experience that Turner wasn't going to get naturally. But I think we're starting to see as Turner gets more reps and he plays a little bit more. He's been in the system for a while. He's more than halfway through his first collegiate season. Like, that advantage that Goff had in knowledge of the system and everything like that.
Gone.
Right. It's, maybe it's not completely like, I'm sure Boosie still has some stuff to learn. But when you have natural ability like that, and clearly, Turner, I think, knows what he's doing out there. He's not making any egregious mistakes. And so in that instance, yeah, you're going to go with the guy who's maybe a little bit more explosive. I think Goff has speed certainly, but Turner has shown ability as a pass catcher. I think he's a little bit faster, and just the home run hitting ability is there in a way that Goff hasn't quite shown yet. I think the one way that Goff could maybe slide back in and see some more reps is maybe in short yardage situations, like on a bunch of 4th and 3rd and shorts. Pitt has more often than not thrown the ball. But I think there's an avenue there where if you set up certain things that Goff could be an effective short yardage back for you, because he is a little bit bigger than either Turner or Goff, or Turner or Reid, excuse me. But yeah, it was a little strange for a while, but I think, if the hot hand never cools off, then why change things up?
Yeah, they've separated themselves, and it's good to know that you still have the option of Juelz Goff, like, especially if they opt to rest Desmond Reid this week, because of being in a walking boot. Like, that's a guy that you can put in there, and he's going to take care of business, or at least keep it, steady. And so, yeah, Kyrian has just separated himself, and he's part of a group of true freshmen that have just become really stand out, and it's fun to see him, and then when he hands it off to Mason as the pair of true freshmen out there.
Speaking of freshmen, Abby, let's shift over to the defensive side of the ball, a place where Cam Lindsey has really shined. Redshirt freshman, but still a guy really seeing his first collegiate action, has really shined for a Pitt defense that is super undermanned. But he is not the only one who's kind of stepping up and filling gaps where Pitt needs them. In fact, these plugs, these guys who are filling in these gaps, are coming from some unlikely places, right? Like, it's not super conventional what we saw last Saturday against NC State.
Yeah, they had to do some special packages. You knew. I mean, I have to assume that they kind of had an idea that Kyle wasn't going to play. I feel like they definitely knew that Rasheem wasn't going to play. And in that instant, and then Nick Lappy was questionable too. And you're down to 4 scholarship linebackers, or 4 left from the 2 deep, I should say. And it's just interesting because you're like, what are they going to do? You even asked last Thursday, like, do you have any special plans? And he kind of just moved along. But then he tells us post game about these Night Stalker, this Night Stalker package. And today in the press conference, he was asked, like, when did that come about? And he said Literally Monday and Tuesday they implemented them, because they kind of realized that they weren't going to do it. And, someone who got heavily featured in some of these special packages was Kavir Marquez Baines, who, is in the secondary, but he was functioning much like a linebacker the other day. And the way Pat Narduzzi described it was, I want our best players on the field, even if that means I'm not having 3 linebackers on the field, even if it means, I'm pulling someone in. And, it's creative. I think it worked really well against NC State. I'm not sure it would work as well against, Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, Miami. But all of those players have really taken a step up. Cameron Lindsey, Isaiah Neal moving to the defensive end, even though he's still listed as defensive tackle on the 2 deep. It's just really impressive to see, honestly, especially when you lose 2 heavy hitters like Kyle Lewis and Rasheem Biles.
Yeah, and it does speak to the depth, but I think certainly the creativity of the coaching staff, the courage, I guess, to try something like that, and to have Kabir Baines like shift a position midweek, really. At one point you think they're playing, oh man, are they playing a little bit more Delta package? No, Kabir Baines is just playing linebacker. And so that gives me some belief that this is pretty sustainable. I mean, we saw Josh Garrier make a couple big plays. In that NC State game, looked like he could kind of hold his own. So if you've got a younger true freshman in the secondary coming along, proving a little bit of something, proving that they can stay on the field, that really does change the dynamic. And then you've got Baines, obviously, who's filling in, Baines Marquise, who's filling in at a really important spot at outside linebacker. And so that's given them some more options at a place where you thought they had none, right?
Mm-hmm.
You thought that it was just going to be Abe Ibrahim and a wing and a prayer. So there is, I think, there should be a little bit more belief that this is sustainable for this team over at least a week. You hope that by the time the bye week ends that you get at least one of those star linebackers back, and then things can kind of settle in a little bit. They even get Nick Lappy back and things can settle in a little bit, because the other thing is, though, you look at that secondary and Cruz Brookins left with, what was a pretty, I don't want to call it scary because he walked off under his own power and, wasn't carted off or anything, but, he was stumbling around on the field a little bit. It seemed like maybe something with his head. And so just he didn't play the rest of the game either. And so I think you're wondering if Cruz Brookins isn't able to go, are you able to afford sending, Baines Marquez up into the box to play some linebacker? I'm not really so sure. So I think you really do. It was a creative solution for the moment, but I am not totally sure that this is something that Pitt can really sustain through a couple of weeks or even beyond. Maybe you can get away with it at Stanford, but yeah, I would be really. I think you need someone back, right? Like you need someone. You need, like, even if it is just Nick Lappy, and I say just Nick Lappy, that's no disrespect to him because he's a good player, but even if it's Nick Lappy, or if it's Cruz Brookins, that really like eases the pressure a lot, because your depth is really, really, really being stress tested right now.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people are so still a little bit focused on the injuries at defensive end, and I have kind of moved past that at this point, just because it feels like they have really shored up that spot, even though Isaiah Neal has moved into that spot. I mean, we did get a little bit of Blaine Spires last week, which is great, because as soon as you can get him back in, then you have Jimmy Scott and Blaine Spires, your ones back out there. But the D line and the defensive end specifically have really been, handling business when needed, despite being so shorthanded from start to finish. And so it's really, like you said, it's the linebackers right now. And I feel like this is something we talked about at the beginning of the season when Jeremiah Marcel and Jaden Bonsu were announced as being out for the whole year. Was, it gets a little bit dicey if both, or like if one or even two of the starting three go out. And I think you got to give a lot of credit to, like you said earlier, Cameron Lindsay. I also think you got to give a lot of credit to Braylon Lovelace. I mean, he's been playing at the Mike spot in the middle all season, and then because of being so shorthanded against NC State, you move him out to the outside, and he played both outside linebacker spots. And that's something we knew he was capable of, but having to switch when you've had such a solid three of you playing the same roles each week is probably a little hard, and I feel like he's handled it really, really well. And so I think I would have been a lot more worried with Rasheem and Kyle going out at the beginning of the season, but I've been really impressed with how people have stepped up, even though it might not have been against some of the best teams. And so I do, like you said, hope that they use this week and the bye week to get those guys healthy so that they have them for that gauntlet at the end of the year.
They certainly need him back. We'll see what happens this week. We're monitoring injury reports, of course, like we always are, staying on our toes for everything that might come out of the program this week. Abby, let's change gears one more time. Close this video out by talking about everyone's favorite freshman quarterback, Mason Heintschel. So fourth start, and coming off of a game at Syracuse where he really did struggle, right? Like we talked about him struggling at Florida State, but it was really two plays, more than two plays. Two plays that really cost him. He had some other hiccups that I think you can chalk up to some freshman mistakes. But what was really the difference in your mind from the Syracuse game, where he struggled certainly, to this week against NC State, where he was, I don't want to say flawless, but you throw for 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, and it's hard to say you had a bad game in any sense.
Yeah, I just felt like he was using all of his options better in the NC State game. I felt like there were a lot of times they got behind the sticks against Syracuse, and then at any quarterback is a little bit scrambled, but especially one who really hasn't had to face that situation. Because when you think about the games he has played in, they have really been solid at keeping by moving the sticks forward and haven't really gotten behind them while Mason's been the starting quarterback. And so this is really the first time he had to face it. And obviously he got out of it. I mean, I think about his rushing touchdown in that, like, that was a really solid play from him when it didn't look like he was gonna, maybe make anything. And so he just used better options. I loved his usage of the short pass, specifically to Kenny Johnson against NC State. Gosh, I was sitting there and I was like, how has NC State's defense not stopped this yet? Because it happened over and over and over again in the first half. And he was running the ball. He was using all of his receivers. And you also got to think the offensive line was a lot better, which helps. And so I think it was just a lot of him, like, kind of having to center himself and realize, take a deep breath. I have all of these options. Let's utilize them. And even when he did get behind the sticks, because that happened a few times against NC State, I thought he handled it a lot better because it just didn't seem like he was as frazzled.
Yeah, it wasn't every third down was a 3rd and 8 or longer or something like that. A lot of the situations were manageable, but that is a credit to Mason, right? Like, it's not, we don't say that to say, oh, he was in easy situations, so he was being kind of bailed out by his teammates. That's not really what was happening. This is, I don't want to call it easy to play offense and play quarterback in Kade Bell's offense, because that's not really what it is. But it is not. I'll borrow the quote from Pat Narduzzi, and Mason Heintschel has said this all the time, but no one has to be Superman in this offense, right? Like, there will be options and plays to be made for you if you see them, if you are not hunting the big play consistently over and over again. And so, Heintschel acknowledged that was his problem up at Syracuse, and it was something that he did better this time around, not trying to do everything himself. We love the 85-yard pass to Blue Hicks, but those are not going to be there consistently, right? And if you want to hit on those big plays, you have to do the little things. You have to connect on the short passes, and you have to stay on schedule, like you said. So, he certainly got some help from his playmakers, like Kenny Johnson being able to make stuff happen after the catch, Blue Hicks being able to do what he was doing, the offensive line, staying mostly penalty-free outside of really, I want to say the first 2 drives of the game. So a lot went right, but Heintschel also really helped himself by not putting the ball in harm's way or making any kind of costly decisions and playing within himself, really. Like, he's super talented, but he's at the end of the day a freshman playing, in his first 4 starts of college football. So I think Pitt does not want to put too much on him. He throws the ball a lot, right? But they don't want him to have to make 20-yard throws every down. So things don't have to be as hard on him as maybe it seems. There doesn't have to be as much on his shoulders. And so I think the more that he can remember that, the better off the Pitt's going to be.
And I think what is interesting is that, in the first 4 games of the season, they were very reliant on those chunk plays, those 85-yard throws. Well, I mean, Eli Holstein did not have an 85-yard throw, but, those big plays like that. And it's nice that, Mason has the ability to do that when it's there, but it's not. It almost feels like he doesn't think that's his first option, which is huge, because as this team has gotten away from needing chunk plays to score, it makes them more dangerous. They're able to move the sticks, and then you're able to throw an 85-yard pass to Blue Hicks for a touchdown, which throws people off. And I think that's been one of Mason's biggest strengths, is his ability to use everyone, because you can't guard, like, you can't key in on Kenny Johnson because Poppy Williams is out there, and you can't just key in on Desmond Reid because Blue Hicks is out there. Like, there are so many weapons, and Mason has really figured out how to utilize each and every one of them.
100% agree, and it's one of the reasons why I'm pretty optimistic that they will be able to take care of business and maybe even cover that 14-point spread, like our friends at FanDuel say, out at Stanford this weekend. Tons more coverage coming on Post-Gazette.com in written form. A lot more stuff coming on this YouTube channel, PG Pitt on YouTube. So make sure you like this video, subscribe so you do not miss a thing, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.